What's going on? Another edition of the MMA podcast, Wednesday, May 22nd. Probably a pretty short podcast, not too much to break down. Joined as always by Sweet Pappy Jones. Pat, what's up, man?
Big Jake, we are just hanging out. It is a terrific Tuesday out here in SoCal. No complaints. Had a fun card over the weekend, and not a whole lot of action cracking off so far this week, but definitely looking forward to some more action upcoming here. And yeah, what about those fights we had over this weekend? Definitely some good times.
Yeah, we're here in the Tampa area, welcoming your Los Angeles Dodgers, who are currently spanking my Rays 7-3, with a man on at the top of the ninth, just making us look like fools out there. But I'm glad that we don't have to dwell on baseball because we had a few events going down this past weekend. We had that Brazil versus Deontay Wilder fight. It's a shame those top three heavyweights are all promoted by different people, and we probably won't see them fight anytime soon. But this isn't a boxing podcast; it's an MMA podcast. We had ONE FC that kind of flew under the radar. I didn't know it was happening until like right before it kicked off. Probably highlighted by Sage Northcutt stepping in there. And we've seen a lot of reaction to what happened in the fight, which was Sage getting knocked out. A lot of criticism coming to ONE FC for the matchmaking there, kind of lining Sage up against a maybe stylistic issue. Just before we went live, you were talking about Uriah Faber. If you want to pull that article back up, you were saying how Sage got injured and like his cheek got shattered. I guess the KO looked bad enough, but he suffered a kind of brutal injury too. Unfortunate, as much as you want to say about the guy, he seems nice enough and doesn't deserve a brutal injury like that. But overall, it was a fun ONE FC card. Like I said, highlighted by Cosmo Alexander. Knocking out Sage Northcutt. And what was that that I guess Faber said about that injury?
Yeah, so Uriah Faber said that basically Cosmo, I mean, he's a very highly rated and decorated kickboxer. He's been around for quite some time. So he said, he hit him with some fancy footwork, and it was Sage's first time fighting in a ring as opposed to an octagon or a cage like most mixed martial arts typically is here in the States. And said basically got him with some footwork. And Uriah Faber's quote: "Sage went one way and then the other way. First time in a ring, and he literally gets manhunted with the nastiest punch and crushes his whole face. Basically splintered his cheek into 30 pieces and broke his orbital bone. He had 8 different fractures, and they literally had to pick the pieces of bone fragments out. 30 different pieces out of his face, courtesy of MMAfighting.com and Alexander K. Lee authoring that one, getting us that quote. Terrible to hear, definitely. I mean, Sage, definitely a very affable guy, one of the genuinely most likable guys I feel in mixed martial arts. And yeah, he gets a lot of memes and he gets a lot of digs thrown his way, but I think people are just hating because he's such a nice guy. It's insane. So definitely wishing him a speedy and full recovery.
In the words of Dana White, "So you want to be a fighter, huh? It's me, Dana White, over here. I don't know why I'm talking like an Italian gangster. This isn't what Dana White sounds like at all over here." Moving on from that terrible impression, we had a UFC Fight Night card as well in Rochester, New York, a town as garbage as the place that they're known for culinarily. I guess it gated hot takes at the Blue Cross Arena, which doubles as a hospital because just everyone's getting shot and stabbed in Rochester all the time. We had the prelims and the main card both on ESPN Plus. Let's, I guess, talk about the prelims first. Actually, a few notable fights there. Zach Cummings in what was a really fun back and forth fight against Trevin Giles. I was curious which way it was going to go to the judges until Zach Cummins locked in a guillotine choke with less than a minute left in regulation. 4 minutes and 1 second into the third round, getting that guillotine win. Ed Herman also with a first round TKO victory over Patrick Cummins, who could be Zach Cummins' brother if he added a G to his name. What else? We had Michael Pereira. Very impressive first round KO, flying knee over Danny Roberts. Desmond Green, the hometown fighter, with a unanimous decision over the Canadian Charles Jourdain. Looked impressive in there in that 3-round fight. And a fight that a lot of us were looking forward to, maybe with some title implications in the future. You have Sijara Eubanks Sarge taking on Aspen Ladd. Aspen Ladd initially was going to be taking on Holly Holm, but they ended up moving Holm to another fight. These are, like I said, in a women's bantamweight division that is looking for a little bit of levity. This fight, I thought, meant a lot. You had Sierra Eubanks, who has looked impressive, just battling her own weight has been an issue. And this was a scrap. I don't know what judge scored it 30-26 Aspen Ladd, but I scored this fight 2-1 Ladd. It was very back and forth. Both of them had their moments. Both of them got beat up by the other, but I think Aspen Ladd deserved it. And, pardon me, rightfully won the decision, Pat.
Yeah, the prelims were definitely very fun. As far as the Aspen Ladd versus Eubanks fight, I would definitely agree. I mean, it was a very close fight. I could see. I mean, I've seen people had that scored as a draw. People had that scored for Eubanks. People had that scored a couple different ways for Aspen Ladd. I really wouldn't be too upset with any of those. I think ultimately it probably did go rightfully to Ladd. She had some savage neck cranks, some good elbows. A lot of the combinations that Eubanks was throwing, a lot of it was just, I mean, we saw at least one of the replays where like the whole combo was just whiffs. Like literally nothing connected in some of those combos. So as far as accuracy, plus she actually had some deep submissions. Most dominance on the ground was shown by Aspen Ladd, and it was back and forth on the feet. So I think, you start tallying it up. I would say I could see it going Ladd's way. But yeah, fun stuff throughout the whole prelims. Desmond Green over Jourdain. I mean, that was the only decision on the prelims aside from Aspen Ladd. Everybody else finishes, KOs, submissions. Really fun to watch. Ed Herman, I believe he was a bit of a dog against Patrick Cummins, cashing with the round 1 TKO. Good to see him back in the win column. Fun times on the ESPN Plus prelims.
And then we switched over to the main card. Davi Ramos leading us off with a unanimous decision over Austin Hubbard. And then we saw a rare, especially for a matchup that this matchup never really has had any direct title implications. So to see like a random fight like this happen 3 times means either there was a lot of weird controversy with a fight, or I guess the other one that comes to mind is Stout versus Spencer Fisher. I think they fought 3 times just because the first time they threw down, it was so great. But you will remember these two initially fought each other, I guess, back in June of 2011 when it was ruled an illegal knee after initially Oliveira kneed Lentz and then wrapped up a rear naked choke afterwards. Back at that Congo versus Barry card, another legendary fight. That was ruled a no contest, and then they ran it back in 2015, 3 years later, where Oliveira locked in a guillotine choke in the 3rd round. It was a back and forth fight, actually one fight of the night that night. And then they fought a 3rd time. Finally, Nick Lentz goes in there, tries to get his revenge, has lost, or I was going to say lost twice, got choked out twice, even though one was a no contest and one was a submission loss. And this time he got TKO'd in the second round. Lentz had a moment or two there in the fight, but it was looking like even sans a finish that Charles Oliveira would have cruised to a judge's decision there. Vicente Luque taking on Derek Krantz. Krantz replacing Neil Magny, who tested positive to dihydroxy LGD/4033, which is the first time I've ever seen a fighter like tweet out the exact thing that they tested hot for, which I wonder if that was just like a troll. And he's just like, yeah, I tested from photo oxygenate 7486. Like, I thought it was strange that he let the exact, I guess, the whatever it was, protein or strain that they found in his system, replaced by promotional newcomer Derek Krantz, who we just saw recently in one of those Dana White YouTube. I think he went to some random ass state and saw Krantz fight, and Krantz got a KO. He signed him, made his UFC debut. Actually, early on, looked like he was going to dispatch the tough alumni Vicente Luque, but like he said in the interview, his strategy was just to weather the storm and let Krantz punch himself out, so to speak. And once his energy was drained, Luque went to work, earning himself the first round TKO. Thoughts on those first three fights?
Oh yeah, great scraps to start off the main card on ESPN Plus. Davi Ramos versus Austin Hubbard. Good scrap all the way around. Oliveira versus Lentz. Yeah, that one perhaps not the best stoppage, but it certainly seemed like things were going Oliveira's way in that one. Yeah, not too much of a complaint on this end. I'm always one to err on the side of fighter safety. Then we got Vicente Luque over Derek Krantz. Good comeback for Luque there. I think he's on a 5-fight finish streak, if I'm not mistaken. He's up there. Only a couple guys in the UFC right now have finish streaks going like that. So definitely very nice, very fun to see. Nice start with those trio of fights there.
And before I do forget, shout out to Rashad Evans, who it was announced during the event will be inducted in the UFC Hall of Fame this July during International Fight Week. Not only one of he not only deserved it just by his fighting alone, but has been an important figure in the sport, being a mentor to a lot of young fighters, a coach, and like we saw at UFC Rochester, an announcer. So he is the true five tool player there, and I'm sure we'll see a lot more of him going into the future. Congrats to Rashad Sugar Evans. Going forward, a fight where I was actually surprised how close the line was here. I hadn't really heard that much about Felicia Spencer. We had heard a lot about Megan Anderson from Australia. Felicia Spencer going out there, not only dispensing Anderson, but doing it in the first round, doing it by finished, locking in the rear naked choke. Looked dominant leading up to it, showed skills both standing up and obviously on the ground now. And it looks like Felicia Spencer, who we really didn't know that well, coming out of Invicta, making her UFC debut, undefeated, 7-0. Went to UCF, a Floridian, shout out. But the Phenom, I guess born in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, fighting out of Jungle MMA in Orlando, making waves there. And yeah, it'll be interesting after a win against, this was a very tough fight to line her up against in her UFC debut. I'll be interested to see who they make for her after this. And in the co-main event, Shoeface Antonio Carlos Jr. was a big favorite against another UFC newcomer and Ian Heinisch, another guy who came from the UFC looking for a fighter YouTube program. And it was Heinisch who really put on a show, winning the unanimous decision 29-28 across the board. The guy just went and executed a really smart game plan over a Shoeface who I believe going into this fight was ranked, was on a 5-fight win streak, including wins against Jack Marchman and Tim Boach, both of those first round submission victories. The guy was on a tear there and drops one to Ian Heinisch, who I don't think this guy was on anyone's radar a week ago. Now, after a co-main event win in Rochester, a lot of fans are looking up this guy's record to see what he's really about. Real big win for Heinisch.
Yeah, it really was impressive showing for Heinisch. First round probably went to Shoeface there for sure, but good comeback. I mean, uh, Carlos Carlos is definitely a well-rounded fighter, good striking, good grappling, and Heinisch was able to weather the storm and able to deal out some good punishment himself, uh, able to overcome some adversity. Really can't ask for much more from a UFC debut. Very nice. Same can be said for Miss Fisher there. Definitely a great performance. Um, or I'm sorry, Felicia Spencer there. Transposing there. Definitely big win over Megan Anderson. Very nice. Quick. I mean, first round took her down, taught her a lesson in low center of gravity, and I was very impressed with her performance.
And that moves us up to that main event. Rafael dos Anjos taking on Kevin Lee. In the first 3 rounds, Lee was hanging in there. Rafael dos Anjos, I want to say, was winning the fight going into the fourth round. And, man, locks in that arm triangle choke. What did you think about the fight, especially leading up to that choke? And then you heard Chael Sonnen, who had he admitted bias training with Lee and all that. Said that it was a tough grind for Lee to have to move up a weight class and fight a 5-round fight. But it was Rafael dos Anjos who really needed a win here. Was coming off 2 losses against Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman. Like I mean, not to gloat about getting this pick correctly, because I think the card before I went like 0-5 or something. But Lee was not able to take advantage of that size and strength differential that Covington and Usman had on Rafael dos Anjos. And it was RDA, the Brazilian, who got the win in Rochester. What did you make of that fight?
Well, I thought it was definitely a main event worthy of this card. It was, I think we touched on it in the last podcast. The name value wasn't really jumping off the page, but a lot of times those are the ones where the most action is. And this one definitely had a lot of action, a lot of finishes. The ones that went to a decision were a lot of fun. Um, and man, this one did not go the distance, did not make it through 3 rounds. Um, and it was action the entire time. That first round was a crazy first round, really great pace. Both these guys, super similar, just so good everywhere the fight goes. Heavy hands, durable, great grappling, super close first round. And then I think Dos Anjos, he got a bit more comfortable as this one went on. And I want to say it was the beginning of the third round, came out with a crazy flying knee attack, just super pressure, cardio going the whole time, fighting a very hard fight, uh, very crazy pace that they were keeping up. Ultimately, Dos Anjos uh, ended up getting the better of Kevin Lee, warmed down, ended up getting that fourth round finish. Beautiful showing from Dos Anjos, getting back on the right track, getting back in the win column there.
And you look at the rankings, it's an interesting question to ask what is next for Rafael Dos Anjos. Because, yeah, he's 1-2 in his last three. But at the same time, those two losses came to arguably the top two guys, the two guys who are going to fight for the strap next, in Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman. So, how far down do you push Rafael Dos Anjos at welterweight, especially considering the fact that he has now a big win against Kevin Lee? I don't know what we do. I'm trying to pull up the rankings here, and of course, I'm just getting a blank page with only Amanda Nunez's face on it. But just to think kind of out loud, I'll pass it to you because I'm drawing blanks. Who do you think we match up next for old RDA at 170 while I try and get this rankings page to load?
Oh yeah,
Son
yeah,
of a bitch.
no. I mean, Dos Anjos, yeah, you can't. I mean, you can't drop him too far down. Just as you mentioned, his only losses at welterweight are to title contenders. So um, now, be that as it may, I don't know. I feel like he hasn't really had the most extensive experience at welterweight, but he came in and was able to beat some really high profile opponents. So uh, he was able to kind of shoot up there pretty quickly. But there's certainly no shortage of options. I mean, Wonder Boy is always kind of perennially at the top of the welterweight
That's
rankings.
what I want to see.
Wonder Boy,
Ooh, him versus
Wonder Boy versus
RDA.
RDA.
That would be fun.
I mean,
Or even
you know,
Tell
it
versus
seems
RDA too. That both of
not
those
a bad.
guys
That's not a bad fight
hasn't
there.
fought either one of those guys yet.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of seems to be what we like to do with Wonder Boy, or at least what he's been getting as of late. You know, just lots of tests with the wrestlers and the grapplers, um, and heck, his last fight, Striker versus Striker, yeah, did not go the way he wanted. Um, I'm sure he would like a rematch with Pettis, um, but doesn't look like that one is happening since Pettis is taking on Nate Diaz. But um, yeah, I think RDA versus Wonder Boy would be a legit match.
Yeah, I got the rankings actually up on Wikipedia. I had no idea they kept an article up with all the rankings. UFC.com on the fritz. Step it up, boys. I opened it up in two browsers and had the same issue on both. But looking at RDA, fight against Wonder Boy would be fun. Darren Till, another fight I like. You have Askren and Masvidal facing off. Yeah, I like those two fights. Um, but yeah, Rafael Dos Anjos now, he is third, and now I think, remains to be in that top tier title contention with a win against old Kevin Lee there. Um, Shoot, that just about does it for UFC Rochester. Other news going down: Junior Dos Santos and Francis Ngannou moved a week earlier. They were initially going to fight at UFC Fight Week at UFC 239 on that main card. Instead, they're going to be fighting in Minneapolis on June 29th to replace the main event, which was initially going to be Tyron Woodley versus Robbie Lawler. Woodley had to back off the card because of injury. They tried to find a late replacement for Robbie, couldn't do it. So instead, we get a banger main event in Minneapolis. I'm sure they aren't too displeased. It's obviously a bummer they won't see Woodley Lawler, but I think JDS versus Ngannou is a proper replacement for that. Other bits of news, we were kind of talking a little bit about the lines being made up for a couple of those fights that we talked about being announced last week and kind of which way the wind was blowing. El Kukui opens up as a betting favorite, minus 190 over Cowboy Cerrone, who's plus 165 at UFC 238. What do you think about that line?
Yeah, you know what? I'm not entirely mad at that line. Tony Ferguson as a favorite over Cerrone. Tony hasn't lost in quite some time. I mean, he's got the 11 fight win streak going on, if I'm not mistaken, at least 11 at
Something
this
nutty.
point. Former interim champion. Yeah, can't be too upset at that one there. And kind of I feel like a lot of the consensus is that Tony maybe uh, has a little bit more durability, let's say, than Cowboy. You know, there's been, but then again, who knows? Cowboy seems like he's been taking some good shots lately. Uh, at first, it was he can't take the body shots. Then it was now Cowboy's chinny, but I haven't really seen either of that in his last few performances. So, um, but yeah, I would say just given the win streak that Tony's got going on here, um, I'm not too mad at it. Um, maybe a little larger than I would say minus 190. That's maybe a bit large. I might say maybe minus 150, something like that. But I mean Vegas knows best there.
Man, I almost would like Tony Ferguson at minus 200. Um, my initial thought is leaning toward Ferguson here, which makes me nervous because every time I feel like I go with the fighter who's just shown to be better. There's some reason why it doesn't happen in here. It's obviously the momentum factor of El Kukui being, on the rack for so long compared to Cowboy, who has just been fighting fight after fight, looking like he is on a mission, on a tear. Um, but Cowboy in the last few years has shown us a lot of vulnerabilities in his game, and we haven't really seen that from Tony Ferguson. So Ferguson has won 11 straight, 12 straight. The guy has looked like a world beater. Personally, I think the only two people at lightweight who could really have a considerable chance of beating a prime 100% Al Kukui is Dustin Poirier or Habib. I think Tony would buzzsaw through Connor at 100% as well. But that's the real question here. Are we going to see a 100% Tony Ferguson? And we will, I think, see quickly there in Chicago at what they're calling the People's Main Event. UFC 240, a little while later, Zabit Magomed Shapirov opening a minus 175 favorite against Brian Ortega. I almost feel the same. I would take Zabit maybe minus 200 here. If everything we're hearing is true, which there's always stories about guys getting hyped up and not living up to it, but Zabit, we were talking about last week how we just have this wave of ultra talented fighters from that same Russia area. Right now, the kind of star of that movement is Habib, but if people are correct about what they're saying, Zabit is the real gem and the real best of that movement, and he has not disappointed. The guy not only possesses an incredibly vast array of skills, both standing up and on the ground, but his cardio seems to be at least so far up to, if not way past, the level of his opponent. So I know I'm riding the guy's nuts pretty hard. It sounds like, but if what we are to hear is correct, Magomed Shapirov could, in just the next year or two, be up there on the pound for pound list, not just at 145. So I will get on the hype train for Zabist and say that minus 175. I like that line against Brian Ortega, who looked really great leading up to that fight against Max. Didn't look that great in the fight against Max.
Yeah, very true. Magomed Sharapov has really just been looking very consistent throughout his tenure here in the UFC. Um, and as you mentioned, Brian Ortega, although he's come out victorious in pretty much every fight he's had except for the Holloway fight, there have been a few fights there where he has been kind of behind the eight ball, so to speak, and come back to get the finish. So, um, just based on that, I would say it's I'm probably riding with Magomed Sharapov early, and I think the line holds up pretty well there.
And I believe, man, I'm looking through the news. Like I mentioned at the top, it was a kind of slow news week as well. You know, we could, as our last topic, I'm sure everyone wants to hear our opinions. And spoiler alert, everyone, our opinions on the end of Game of Thrones. It was around for like a million seasons on HBO or whatever it was on, and everyone watched as King, as the one guy and his dragons took on the other guy's dragons, and Pat and I were real enthralled. We're both real big Thrones guys. Pat, what did you think of the dragons and the Game of Thrones that we both totally watch because we're nerds like that?
Yeah, it was a great fun time. Um, Lots of things happened.
That
Um,
one lady did the thing.
and then I think everybody just died at the end. I don't know. That's
I saw a
uh,
lot of people on my Twitter being like, "Oh my god, you killed this person!" Like,
mm,
and
hmm
I care. Um,
yeah, a lot of things.
a lot of things happened.
Yeah, most of them for no reason.
The dragons. That was
Mm.
our Game of Thrones recap. I really don't have any of that. It was we had that UFC Rochester card. I guess this Thursday, are you going to be tuning in PFL, doing a little card on ESPN Plus? I think headlined by Lance Palmer, who's had a lot of success over there in Professional Fighters League. I'm not sure what they're calling it. I've seen it called PFL 13 because it is their 13th overall event. I've also I saw on ESPN they were calling it PFL 2 because it's like the second event of the 2019 season. That makes sense too. It's an interesting thing they're doing over with PFL if you're kind of tired of the whole approach the UFC seems to take as far as giving fighters title shots and fights based on how much money it will generate rather than who actually deserves the fight, which I think almost all real fans of the sport can put themselves on that list. You know, you might not be seeing elite talent like the UFC puts out, but it's nice to see at least one promotion doing it right as far as having a structure, having a regular season, so to speak, where everyone fights three times, gets to stack as many points as they can get. Then there being a playoffs and seedings, and actually earning, you know, a semifinal or a title fight instead of getting it just for having a good gimmick. Which, don't get me wrong, I love a good gimmick. I love a Conor McGregor. I love a Chael Sonnen. But you know, when you have these guys not just cutting the line every now and then, but doing it over and over and over, it gets a little bit frustrating as a fan. So yeah, go ahead and tune into PFL, see what they're all about if you have not yet. Pat, anything else before we put a lid on this one and send it out to the interwebs?
Oh, Jake, it's nothing but love for the people, nothing but love for yourself. Always a fun time on the MMA podcast. Yeah, looking forward to a little PFL action this Thursday. Should satiate us nicely. A little tournament action to hold us over until the week after, where we get a little more UFC back in. But Yeah, always a good time, and thank you to everybody for listening.
Always a good time. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you. We will be back next week. That Lionheart versus Anthony Smith card, I think, is in Stockholm. That's around the corner. UFC 238 around the corner. That Bellator card with Chael Sonnen taking on Lyoto Machida, that's just in 2 or 3 weeks. It'll be a fun June of fights, fun summer of fights, and we will hopefully get back to a regular schedule. I believe this is 3 weeks in a row. I know we had been a little erratic there, and for that we apologize, but we're back with it. We appreciate you listening, and we have fun doing it. So until next week, we love you. As Pat says, keep your nose to the grindstone and do other cool shit. I forget the exact quote. We love you. We'll see you next week. See ya. We out.